Welcome back. This is Cybersecurity Part 5. Where did you put your resources? In Cybersecurity Part 4, I wrote about ransomware. In Part 5, 6, 7, and 8, I'm going to flip the model, do more speaking, and use some visuals to walk people through some new topics that are really coming up now with our current situation, which is a global pandemic. Today's topic, where did you put your resources, is going to address how schools are meeting their business continuity plan. This is a test worldwide for every school. Has your school met its business continuity plan? We're going to talk about that in the end because the first thing we want to get into are common things that everybody's been talking about. I have been monitoring multiple networks. In fact, I was in one kind of online group that had 100,000 people in it. There was so much information flowing through it. After a couple of weeks, I had to leave. I literally couldn't help people. I couldn't. It was so big, I couldn't get anyone to focus or pay attention to answers to problems. And I also started noticing that instead of looking things up, people were literally just asking somebody and taking one person's opinion, which was kind of strange. Anyway, um, I feel very fortunate. I saw the trend happening with school closures many, many weeks before it happened in the United States, where I'm located, and I was able to work with my administration and the teachers and the students and get everybody ready. And they were ready a solid week, like trained, ready, and confident enough to start doing everything online a solid week before our closure. So that was 3 weeks of training and preparation, then one additional week, and then we were off and pretty good to go. However, like many schools, we made a lot of mistakes, and I started looking at my user groups and forums to see what people are asking, and I was actually shocked at what was happening, and I realized that after this situation is over, there is going to be some very big changes in schools, and if there aren't, then when this happens again, schools are truly going to be held accountable by parents because obviously they've had experience now, so they should be adjusting. In this particular talk, I want to focus on the past and where a school or IT department may have spent their money and time. Because I think it's worth an analysis and discussion because a lot of the models that people have been using, frankly, have been outdated for a decade, but they weren't challenged. And under pressure, they collapse, especially under the pressure of having to close down a facility and deliver education remotely. Now, online learning has been around for a long time, and there are people who do it very well and do it every day. So it's not like something had to be invented. It's just something had to be adopted or embraced. And many of the tools schools need to run online education were at their fingertips when this happened, but they didn't prepare them right, they didn't practice with them, and their focus was somewhere else. Their focus was in a school that just doesn't exist anymore. And that just leads you down a path that makes it impossible for you to maintain business continuity when your campus is closed. Firewalls. Firewalls are really expensive. I just personally had a big discussion about firewalls, and my feeling was the firewall that needed to be purchased was uh, fairly moderate, not that advanced. We weren't worried about being attacked by like a nation state because we're a school, and they're expensive. And so I'm looking at resources, and I'm like, We just need a firewall that meets the following criteria and doesn't need to be more than that. Frankly, for what we need, it's not really that useful. It's not really going to help us. If we get 98% of all the technology in the cloud, we just don't really need a firewall that exceeds a certain limit as a school. We're not storing on campus, we're not storing personal identification information. We're not storing credit card data. We're not storing financial data. There's all these things we're not storing. And so, yes, we don't want people breaking into the network, but at the same time, we don't have somebody monitoring the firewall 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's going to be reports, there's going to be user activity, but we need a certain set of features. But after those features, we just don't need any more. And there's a price point with firewalls where you've got like a core set of features that almost everyone has, and then you have all these advanced features and all these advanced configurations, which are amazing. But to get to those, your price point jumps. I mean, we're talking like jumps from $15,000 to maybe $30,000 to $50,000. So right now, you've got to be thinking to yourself, all these teachers and all these students are working at home. I haven't seen a single thread of conversation about students and teachers being hacked or whatever. They're not using any advanced security at home. They're not. They're probably using really, really bad security at home. And they're working just fine. And that is something to think about. Right now, they're all easy targets and they're not being targeted. Just because, you have a building and a name and a campus doesn't mean you're going to be a target. And if you have a low target profile, then that should really inform what you're spending your money on. I would say if you spent your money on firewalls before user education, if you spent your money on firewalls before explaining to people how to secure their own machines, know if something's up, how to use their activity monitor, all kinds of things. If you didn't do any of that, but you bought a firewall, now your firewall's useless. It's like a fort that people are marching around. It's completely useless. So the shift there has to be user education and refocusing people on the client. They need to learn to master their client. And I'm the first one to say that to anybody. If any head of school says, do you think we should make it as easy as possible for people to use their laptops? Absolutely not. People need to learn how to use their laptops as a tool, and they need to learn a basic set of self defense, if you will. They need to learn how to detect problems, do some very quick analysis, and how to report it, and some steps to mitigate possible damage from intrusion. And you can do that with a person who isn't even interested. There are ways to do it. But it takes time, it takes a little bit of money, it takes resources. And if those resources went into a firewall, then the firewall is working and there's nobody there for it to protect. Local storage and network drives. I would say 10 years ago, when I wrote my guide, I specifically was like, these things need to go, get rid of them, do whatever you can to get everything in the cloud, get rid of the stuff. There's some information that you may legally have to keep on campus. The total amount of that information is minuscule compared to all the information that you have. And if you put everything into local network storage and you had people mounting drives and accessing this and accessing that, you're probably suffering right now if those people are students and you've got hundreds or thousands of students who need locally stored information. Now, you could set up VPNs and stuff for them to connect, but that's messy and it's hard to maintain. And the transfer speed and the experience is awful. So hopefully, after this experience, when everybody goes back together, they're going to be like, we need to reduce these. We if we are not legally required to store it on campus, we've got to make sure it is available somewhere in the cloud. even if it's off and synced, but it's there in case of an emergency. You need to make certain that you can get to this data and use it if you need it. High tech attendance systems. I spent the last 2 or 3 years, this has come up multiple times, and I'm guilty of it. I've looked into it. If you spent money on high tech attendance systems that can do biometrics or whatever when students come on and off the campus, but you didn't develop an attendance workflow that made sense, and you didn't develop a way to do attendance when there was no technology, right now you're suffering. This is a wake up call. Any process that you are running needs to be able to run without any technology. And then you build the technology off of that workflow. You will develop efficiencies, you will develop improvements. If you need technology to run a core workflow, then you're going to have a problem when your situation changes. Now, there are some workflows that are pure technology. For example, you might think, oh, we use an online system to do budgets, so that is a budget workflow that's pure technology based. Actually, it's not. You could do budgeting on paper, you could do budgeting a million different ways that are analog. And those analog methods were used to develop that software that you're using. It just happened at a different level, and then you purchased the product. You just weren't part of that group that developed the software that was based on some type of analog workflow. So, um, please, especially with attendance, it is really important to know that students are checking in and they're working. Make certain that you can do attendance in any scenario. No power. How do we know where all the kids are at? No internet, but the computers are working inside our local network at school. How do we know where all the kids are at? No network, power's on. How can we use our phones to make sure we know where all the kids are at? Go through all those scenarios. Make sure you have a way to do that in every case. Non BYOD programs. Now, there's a middle ground here. Your school may not have a BYOD program, but when you give the students their laptops, they have full admin rights. So any school right now that's having to work with all these students, and those students have laptops without admin privileges, those schools are suffering. Now, some of the schools were like, no, no, we're managing it. We put TeamViewer or GoToMeeting or whatever on all the laptops and we're managing it. That is a horrible use and waste of time. Students, especially like from grade 8 and up, and I would say in most cases 6, but at least in grade 8 and up, need admin rights for their machines. They need to be able to work. They need to be able to install. They need freedom. And they're not going to be able to have a good educational experience if every time they want to do something, they need somebody to connect and install it for them. When you're working remotely, you need cameras, you need microphones. A student might hate the microphone on their laptop, they go buy one, they can't install it. They might want a new webcam, they can't install it. Their school computer stops working, they switch to a home computer, they switch to like an iPad or something that they own, and they have a better experience. That's really gonna red flag the parents. Like, wait a second, why can't the tool the school's given you work off campus? Like, why do you physically need someone from your school to always do this for you? It's not feasible. It hasn't been feasible for a long time. Um, I don't know a single software development platform that is not expecting users to have admin rights. Now, it's totally reasonable if you're using some type of MDM in the cloud where you can push configurations and make changes to student equipment and teacher equipment via the cloud. That is reasonable. However, this pandemic situation is bad, but it could be worse. And cloud services are taking a huge hit as it is. You want to minimize the delays that people are experiencing. And you are still going to have to connect and help people one on one. There's a lot to do. And one support call could take anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, depending on the problem. And most schools don't have dozens of support people. They might have a handful, and then they have hundreds of students and 100 or more teachers and other staff that all need help. So you want to minimize the time you're spending constantly connecting and doing simple jobs because people don't have permission. So hopefully after this, you're going to switch to BYOD or something similar. If you're not aware and you're an Apple school, Apple does have a family program where the school can choose the equipment, families purchase it directly, but it counts in the school's device enrollment program. So that means the parents can buy it, have admin control, they can get it shipped directly to their homes. Um, you can enroll it in your MDM, push a configuration to it. That is a good middle ground. It's just something to think about. And if you're doing this stuff on Windows, I guess that's fine. Most Windows computers can be pretty easily unlocked and beaten. It is a waste of time, in my opinion, but to each its own. This flows into restricted user access. Same thing. I spoke to a school that had set up um, users on the machines, and the machines lost synchronization, obviously, to the campus, and it locked everybody out. And then I was like, okay, well, you're just going to have to send everybody the local administrative login, you know, for their machines and then walk them through the creation process. Like, this is your only option. And they're like, well, there's not really a standard local admin login. They didn't go into detail with me, but they locked the machines down so hard that off campus for more than like 2 days, they become useless. So basically, over a long weekend, if you don't come back in and sync up on the network, the machine becomes dead. I've never heard of this before, but that's an extreme case. The most common case is they have a high school student who's trying to download and install stuff, or a middle school student, and um, every single step requires administrative access. The student doesn't have it, and they have to remote in to do the work for them. Again, this is all connected to not being BYOD or not having some kind of hybrid program that gives them proper access. Students need access, teachers need access. I would argue the future is looking at a method of setting up your network where the business and operational side of your network, health, and maybe sports, depending on if you're doing a lot of competitive sports and keeping data, are on a network, and everyone else is basically 4G LTE 5G using some type of dongle or something to connect, and you're just letting them connect, and you're managing everything in the cloud, and you're really not worrying about this like individual user, like what they can do, what they can't do on their laptops. You defend your network, you make sure that when people connect to your network, they're following some certain rules, but when they go home, they can work and they can work freely. That's I feel like that's coming, and after something like this has happened, I feel like that is probably going to come sooner than later. iPads or tablets for middle and high school. I know some schools decided no more laptops, we don't need them. This would be fine if all the kids just had iPads. And I've gone back and forth with this idea myself. I would only consider it if I was very confident the students had a, a fully functional computer at home, at least the majority of them. Since this has started, I have seen numerous issues with people trying to do heavy video conferencing, screen sharing, and working collaboratively online, where a percentage of students had iPads or mobile devices they wanted to use, and the other group were using laptops. And there is a big discrepancy in what you can do. So, unfortunately, right now, I would say that If you're working collaboratively with a team, having an iPad or mobile device is great because you can log in simultaneously and use that device for chat and some other stuff. But you really need something with a bit more horsepower to do video conferencing all day long. I'm sure there are some apps that are going to improve and this may change in the future. But to be prepared to work remotely for long periods of time, students and teachers need a laptop. Computer labs, my last one here. And what can I say? If you have courses that needed a computer lab to run because either the software you were using or the data or whatever couldn't run on the student laptop, well, those programs are dead right now. And that should be a wake up call. My advice is really simple. Um, if you can't run it on the student laptop, then make sure it's not a requirement. So it's great, for example, for movie making to have some nice, powerful workstations for visual effects. But all your core editing, all your collaborative work, all of that needs to happen on the laptop, and it needs to be able to be shared from the laptop to the community privately, not just on YouTube, but privately. All that needs to be worked out. It needs to be part of the workflow so that if students were at home, they could still make movies, they could still record, they could still do audio work, they could do the bulk of it. They can learn to tell stories, they can get the core concepts down, and they can still do some effects, but just not the same long render effects that would be required, that would require like a powerful workstation. And this also goes back to computer science and certain schools not giving students access. So some schools don't want to give students access, admin access on their laptops, so they set up computer labs for programming where they're working with a language that requires admin access. Well, now those students can't do programming. So, and I've seen this with robotics, same. The robotics equipment requires you to have admin access to the computer usually. You need to be able to install and remove drivers, all kinds of stuff. And they're like, no, we don't want to do that. So they have a few computers set up for robotics. Well, now they can't do that either. And you're like, but wait, wouldn't they need the robots? And yeah, you could have kids could have taken robots home and worked on them. Actually, kids can work collaboratively on one robot if they can program. If they have video conferencing, they need video, they need audio, they need one student with the robot, and they need a software platform and IDE that they can run on their laptops. They actually can program collaboratively and build a robot. It's not really limited. They can do that. And so this is another thing that people don't think about. They're like, oh, we have a room for robotics. Well, that room's kind of useless now. And if the kids were in a robotics program for like the semester, they've lost that. And there was no reason to. So, computer labs need to go away. Um, you can have workstations set up for special jobs, but they shouldn't be required to get to the core of the subject to meet the curriculum requirements and the standards. All right, now, final bit here is on business continuity. Okay, business continuity is the advanced planning and preparation undertaken to ensure that an organization will have the capability to operate its critical business functions during emergency events. And you can read the rest of this. You'll see the word pandemic. When you study risk management and you study risk mitigation, you are focused on business continuity. If you're a school, what is your business? Education. Your business is education. You've got to be able to deliver your curriculum to maintain business continuity. And if your curriculum and your technology are not collaborative, if the curriculum and the technology are not collaborative, if they are not designed to work together, then you're constantly meeting your business continuity because people are are finding ways to put a square peg in a round hole. They're constantly filling in those gaps. And technology's like, oh, everything's working. And educational admin are like, oh, everything's working. It's not really working together. It's just working. It's on, but nobody's using it. Or people are using it and complaining, and they're just kind of doing something else in the background to make it happen. Now, that doesn't work because everything needs to flow and work together. And if technology, for the sake of technology, was driving the educational technology program, you're going to notice that because nothing's working right. Um, the IT department really has no idea how any of the educational stuff works. They don't really have anything to do because their entire job was maintaining the firewall and some stuff on campus, which is not available now. So if everything's in the cloud and it's been configured properly and everyone's working freely, then um, you're going to see that your technology department is kind of sitting idle. If your technology department was really part of the fundamental shift in building up the cloud, constantly adding resources, constantly monitoring the cloud, constantly bringing new solutions, cloud based, to the community, they're fully engaged right now. And they're studying and they're looking and they're taking feedback and they're making adjustments. Business continuity post this pandemic for education needs to change. And I'm hoping everybody is seeing that. Cybersecurity is about a lot of things, but mostly it is about informing your users and giving them platforms that let them work, that have the right level of security to guard and defend the right level of assets. And if you've locked everything down or put all your money into something that isn't useful, then you're not maintaining business continuity and you're going to lose your biggest asset. And your biggest assets are your students. And you're going to lose your educational momentum. You're going to lose your learning. Your curve is going to flatten. People are just going to freeze and not be able to do anything. And thinking that your asset is protecting switches and, like, I don't know, emails that are archived and stored on a hard drive, those aren't the biggest assets that schools have. And when those assets, those human resources are out there working independently from home, they need a security structure and they need a plan that is designed for flexibility as much as it is designed for control, probably even more.